Kate McCaffrey is an internationally published author whose latest book is Double Lives for adults, but she's already a successful published author of 5 award-winning novels for young adults, including Destroying Avalon, In Ecstasy, Beautiful Monster, Crashing Down, and Saving Jazz. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kate.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege.
I'm so excited for you in this book, Double Lives. This is your first adult novel, because you have written very many YA, young adult novels before, but this is your first adult novel, and what a cracker. For people who haven't got it yet, can you tell us what it's about?
So Double Lives is it's a story about a journalist, Amy Reinhardt, and she's returned back to Perth from being in Melbourne. She pitches this idea about a live podcast to her radio station, and she finds this case, which is Jonah Scott, who murdered his girlfriend, disposed of the body, but then when he was confronted by the police, he immediately confessed and pleaded guilty and went to prison. And she thinks there's something really strange about this. So she uses that as her podcast to investigate the strangeness of the crime. And in doing that, then she has to investigate a lot about her past. And so it's written as a frame narrative, the story within the story. And the internal story is, of course, the podcast, and the external story is Amy's life.
So clever. There are so many elements that are really of the zeitgeist at the moment. How did you come up with the idea for this book?
I don't really know, actually.
You must.
I wanted to write a story, and I wanted to discuss there's a transgender storyline in it. And I wanted to look at that, but I wanted to look at it from a very much a cisgendered perspective. And as you mentioned, I am a YA writer. I didn't feel that I could locate it in the schoolyard, which is where I would normally have explored, an issue. So I started to write it with this journalist. And I think actually it's the origin of the idea actually came from the Harry Crawford, Eugenia Fellini case, which Amy cites at the very start. That's really what triggered me into looking at it through a sort of a crime lens, I guess. Mm. And I just thought that Harry Crawford story was just incredible. It was just an incredible story. And so I wanted to embed that in the narrative. And I think that was where I went from there.
So your catalyst to cross from young adult, from writing YA to adult, was because of the exploration that you wanted to do into this topic. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. And when I was still teaching, because I was a high school teacher for 20 odd years, and I always had the confidence of the students. They'd come and talk to me about their issues and fitting in, and most of my YA books really came from kids talking to me. And in the later years, because I resigned from teaching in 2018, in the later years it was mostly about identity and particularly gender identity. So I'd have the kids come and talk to me, and I was teaching in a private Catholic school. And it was becoming an issue in as much as kids were transitioning and the school didn't really know how to deal with it. It was like, well, what uniform do they wear and what toilets do they use? And it was just that kind of, what I found most interesting was the kids were completely fine with it. Like, the kids were so tolerant, they were so accepting, and they were like, so what's your big deal? But it was the older generation, my generation, the executive, that didn't know how to deal with this. And basically, I remember one staff meeting and a member of executive telling us about this kid transitioning and then mixing up the pronouns. And then she got so exasperated and she threw her hands in the air and she said, oh, that poor mother, that poor mother. And for me, it was like, wow, this is how it affects other people, not the person themselves. And I think that was really the reason why I wanted to explore that.
So cast your mind back to when you first started writing, your first YA novel. What made you want to write novels?
I always wanted to write novels. And I think that, when I was at school and the teacher said, you're doing a short story, to me that was like a gift. Yay. And I could write a short story that was like a small novella, and I'd put a cover page on it, and my mum would like machine stitch the edge, so I would be handing in this little novel with an imprint page. I just always wanted to write stories. And I think that when I wrote my first YA, which was Destroying Avalon, I'd been, teaching English to this group of people who actually hated reading, and that was something so alien. How do you hate reading? And so I was teaching English, and I was looking for books that I could get my kids to connect with, and they connected with The Outsiders. And The Outsiders was written in 1965 maybe, and it was American, but it was the realness and the relatability. And so that's what I wanted to do. And so that's why, I wrote YA, because I wanted to write for kids who didn't like reading, and they could read it and they'd go at the end of it, oh, yeah, no, that was okay. And it was like, good, you finished it.
How many YA novels did you write?
5. I've got 5. And I'm actually doing a PhD at the moment at Curtin University, and it is, the topic is YA fiction, controversial YA fiction as a vehicle. And I think that it's such an important vehicle, like in the safety of the classroom or the school, you can deal with controversial topics and you can allow kids to have express their opinion, and it's very safe. So, but I didn't feel like I could do that with Double Lives. I didn't feel like I could locate it as a YA novel, which is why I've gone into this area.
So Double Lives, then you've gone into adult fiction. Did you find it more liberating or more restrictive, maybe, I don't know, writing for an adult audience as opposed to what you used to with YA?
I don't know about other writers, but I don't think I particularly have an audience in mind. And I think that you write this story, and I think that often where it lands is really more of a marketing thing, from a publishing perspective. When I wrote Double Lives, I didn't realize I was writing an adult book. I was just writing a book. And my agent, firstly, was sort of taking it out as a YA. And then she went, I think we need to say that this is an adult. And the minute she said it's an adult book, it got a contract. So I think it's writing is you just write the story, and it's no more challenging. I don't think it's the challenge is, trying to come up with something that's compelling or that's going to make people want to, turn the next page. I think that's really what it is.
And as you say, you have a couple of stories. I mean, you have a story within a story, in a sense. Yeah. And you need to, the investigation that she's doing needs to come to some kind of resolution. So did you know what that resolution was going to be without discussing any spoilers? Did you know what that resolution was going to be before you started? Or in other words, did you plan the whole thing, or did you see what happened?
Yeah, I didn't plan it. And I think we actually had the official book launch last night. And I was asked that very same question, and it's no, I actually have no idea where I'm going to end up when I start. And sometimes it's really interesting. There's a part in Double Lives which is about Amy's past. And when I got to that, when I wrote that part, I was as surprised as the readers have been. They've said, oh, I didn't see that coming. And I was like, I didn't see that coming either. It just happened. And so, no, I had no idea where this was going. And when I got to that final resolution, it felt right, but I hadn't planned it. No.
So when you say, because I understand what you're saying, it just happened out of the writing process. I'm curious to know whether it happens while you're thinking about it, percolating about it, going for a walk, in the shower, or it actually happens when you're writing.
Yes, that is such a good question. And the word percolating is how I actually think it does happen. And I think for me, up until 2018, being a full-time high school teacher, English teacher, I was always percolating the ideas. And then when I would have the opportunity to write, which was generally in the 2 weeks of the school holidays, it would just like come out, and I remember with Saving Jazz, which was my 5th YA, I wrote 10,000 words one day, and I wrote 14,000 words the next day. And I know I was, and I mentioned it, very, very silly of me. I actually, the second day, I'd driven to Fremantle to where my publisher was. There was a get together with some writers, and as I was driving, I was like, oh, my fingers are so sore, and I thought, oh, I must be developing arthritis. And I got to this thing, and I said, oh, I've written like 24,000 words over the last 2 days, and there was this horror, and everybody looked at me like, and I was like, oh, I didn't mean to sound boastful. I was just like, my fingers hurt. But it is. I think that going for a walk, doing the gardening, cleaning the house, it's always happening. And then when you sit down, there's probably a lot more planned than you even. So I sit down and I just start writing, but I think I've been planning it for quite a while.
Yes. Now, what kind of research did you have to do for this book? Because, your protagonist is a journalist and there's obviously crime involved. So what kind of research did you have to do?
Okay. Extensive. It's extensive. And as you said, because there's so many different things that I had to find out about, like journalism, because I'm not one. The transgender storyline, which was so important to get that right, and to so that started with my students, talking to them, and then being involved in online communities of the LGBTQI plus. Then my publisher got a sensitivity reader, just so that we could make sure that we were being mindful and respectful. Then, of course, I deal with cults, and there's a FBI deprogrammer of cult members, so I had to investigate that. It's extensive, and again, like part of my PhD is looking at the cycle of research and practice. And this Double Lives was actually a prime example of how you have to go from one to the other and back again. And so you spend a long time researching for, a paragraph, maybe.
Wow. Yeah. Because from what you're saying, your process is that you need to, because you're not planning it, you are waiting till you percolate and then you realize, oh, I need that bit of information. So yes. you have to, is it a stop to your flow to have to then go research it?
I don't think so, because people talk about writer's block, and I've never had writer's block, because if I don't know something, then I go into that, let me find out about it. So it's a constant flow, whether it's writing this or reading that, and then it's that toing and froing. So you're always working.
Is it, do you fall into a trap of going down the rabbit hole that you just really, way too far?
Oh, totally. Yeah, totally. And I find that, yeah, so you start to explore one thing, and then you find yourself, you're way over there. That actually might be information for another book, so I know that it was funny when I wrote my 5th YA, which is Saving Jazz. I actually sat down to write a completely different book. I actually sat down to write a book about toxic masculinity in the AFL. And as I started researching,
Could write an encyclopedia on that.
Well, interestingly enough, that is my PhD, is toxic masculinity in the AFL. So I sat down to write it, and I came across this article about this young girl, and that totally changed my direction. So I shelved the AFL story, wrote Saving Jazz, and for my PhD, I've just come back to it. So yeah, the rabbit hole takes you in, but it can also, give you other things that you're going to explore.
But when you are doing that research, because it sounds like, yes, the research is part of the flow. You're just kind of zigzagging from writing to research. But when you're doing the research, what kind of record keeping are you doing? Like, are you just researching it and you're retaining it? Or have you got some kind of system where you've got, it depends, I guess, on what your personality's like, but have you got some kind of system where you're recording it somewhere?
Yes, it's an old-fashioned system, and it's pen and paper. it's I mean, if I could just, oh, here we are. So for whatever book I'm writing, I just sort of start to make my notes, and then I go back to them and I go, oh, that was a good idea, I'll use that now. It's pen and paper. Every book I've written, I've kept the notes.
Wow. And do you keep a separate notebook for each book?
Yeah. Okay. Some of them have more than one, but it's I can't research and type, and I think that's part of that, that being able to retain the knowledge, once you've written it down. But yeah, it's very old school.
Now that you've written your first adult novel, and I know you say you just need to write the story you want to write without necessarily thinking of the age of the readership, but now is your next novel going to be an adult novel?
Well, it's so Double Lives isn't actually the first adult novel I've written. It's the first adult novel I've published. Okay. So I started a master's years and years ago at UWA, and that was at the time that my YA books were just being published, and my master's was adult fiction, and it was crime, and it was a revenge story, which there's like 80,000 words of that needs a little bit of a renovation, and it's probably okay. I've written another one. My agent and I were talking yesterday, and I said to her, I've got this book. It's, if you like Gone Girl, it's kind of like that. And she went, send it to me. And so they're there, but then again, like my PhD is YA. So I would be really happy to do whatever is a compelling read, whatever, people are going to like, whether they're young adults or they're adults. And I think most of us will agree that adults read YA. I mean,
yeah, for sure. So you're already a very established author, but if you could cast your mind back, because a lot of people love to know this sort of thing, on how you got your agent, tell us that story.
Well, my agent is actually relatively recent. So I've always I've been in a very privileged position where Fremantle Press, who publish my YA books, they act as your agent as well. It's a small publishing house, and they cocoon you and they look after you and they sell all of your rights, and not without your permission, but sure. they do the right thing. So I've always been on my own as such, and it was only recently I was approached. A girlfriend of mine in New South Wales was part of a writers group, and one of her friends had got this new agent, and she'd mentioned me to this agent, and this agent was really interested, and she's starting up her own agency. And it's just a liberating feeling to actually have somebody else deal with that. And that's what is so nice about having an agent. And Fiona is, fabulous. She's just so wonderful, and she has managed to, get Double Lives to Echo Publishing in Sydney, and and they've just been amazing, you know. So finding an agent is actually very difficult. And I know I looked into it when I first got published, and it's probably easier to get a publisher than it is to get an agent. It's this real, yeah, it's really tricky.
Tell me about your writing day, because you stopped being a full-time teacher in 2018. So when you are in the depths of writing, is it a full focus on writing? Because I know that you do some other things as well, but when you are having a writing day,
Yep.
what does that look like? How many hours does it go for? Does it, start at the crack of dawn while you sacrifice a goat or something? Is there a ritual that you go through?
It feels like it. Well, my husband is also a writer, and he has this really cute little wooden cabin in the back garden, and we've got this beautiful back garden. I've got this is the space I'm in, which is a beautiful room which looks out into the garden. But we normally get up, we go to the gym. We go to the gym for 7 o'clock in the morning, come back, and then I'll go for a walk on the beach. We live about 400 meters from one of the most beautiful beaches in WA. And then, so really, I'm at my desk day proper at, say, 9 o'clock. And then we just work. We'll stop and we'll have lunch. Nick will sometimes go and get us yum cha. We'll sit in the back garden and have yum cha. And then it's, I'll see you later, see ya. And then I'll come back here and he'll go back there. And then we work until about 4. It's full on, like 9 to 4. And it has to be, you have to be completely disciplined about it. Otherwise you'd find yourself, falling down the rabbit hole of the internet, getting on YouTube and, whatever. But, and I do other things. I mean, if you can see behind me, there's a calendar on the wall there. That's all the other things that I have to do as well. And so at the moment, I think it's the same in the eastern states, but at the moment here, we're in exam time, and I hire myself out as this external marker, which is ironic because one of the reasons I gave up teaching was because the marking was just killing me. But in this exam time, I take on, all this marking, and so I fit that in as well.
Right. What else do you do?
So I call myself an education consultant. I go to schools and I teach year 11 and 12 students how to write for the composing section of the exam. I also do book talks and author talks. I do the marking. The marking is a big part of it. And of course, I'm doing my PhD. So
goodness me. I think though, Kate, you need his and her sheds.
I think so too.
I think you absolutely need your own writer's shed where you can, personalize it. He can have his, that's fine. But he's got a shed. You need a shed too.
I know. I think that I really ripped myself off there. I was luring him into my home. I was like, here's a nice little place for you.
My partner and I have sheds, a shed each, but his has electricity and mine doesn't. So that's got to be rectified.
Right, totally.
All right. What was the most rewarding thing about writing Double Lives?
I think it's actually a bit sad. I think my mum died last year, and I just think she would have loved this book, and that was the most rewarding thing. I mean, I dedicate it to her, but it was just, I think she would have gone, oh, you've really got it here, because my mum was, I like to say my mum had a God gene. She was always searching for something. And I think that when she was a child, they were Jehovah's Witnesses, and then she left the Jehovah's Witnesses, and then I think she joined the Church of England, and then she did this, and then she did that. And at the end of her life, she was a Buddhist. And I think she was always searching for something. And that's kind of what I think comes through with the whole religion cult stuff. Oh, she was actually part of a flower essence cult. And I think mum would have really liked that. So that was kind of one of the most rewarding things about the book, but she never got to see it.
We always end with, what are your top 3 tips for aspiring writers who would love to be in a position where you are one day?
Yep. My first tip would be never give up. And I think that the difference between a published writer and an unpublished writer is the published writer never gave up. You're going to get rejected. You're going to get, patted down all the time, but you've just got to keep going. And so I think tip 2 would be you've got to believe. You've got to believe that you can do it. I remember as an aspiring writer being told you've got more chance of making the Olympic team than you do of getting a book published in Australia. And I watched the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games, and there were plenty of people on that team. And I was like, you made it to the Olympics? Well, I'm going to get my book published. So I think you've got to have determination, you've got to have belief, persistence, resilience. It's all about being resilient, because haters are going to hate. And I won the West Australian Premier's Award for Destroying Avalon. Can I tell you what the judges said? No. But can I tell you the worst review I ever got? Yes, word for word. And it began, Destroying Avalon brought tears to my eyes, tears of boredom. Now, that has never left me. And I think that's, you've just got to go, okay, you didn't like it. And my dad used to say, you can't please all the people all the time. And I think you've got to have all of these things, and you've just got to have a love for it. Last night at the launch of Double Lives, an aspiring writer said, I'm writing this book, but I'm not really invested in it. And I was like, well, then put it down. If you're not invested in it, it's not going to be authentic. It's not going to be you. So put it down, come back to it at another time. If you think it's a good story, but you're not really ready for it, leave it. Stories last, as we know, they endure time. Look at The Handmaid's Tale.
Love it. So don't give up.
Yep.
Believe in yourself.
Yep.
And what was the third one?
Oh, I think I blended them all together.
Yeah, I think so.
Don't give up, believe in yourself. And be invested, be passionate.
Oh, yeah.
Do it because you love it. Yeah.
Brilliant.
People say, why do you write? And it's like, why do you breathe? Like, you can't not breathe. I can't not write. And I think that's just what I wanted to do. And I think that when you feel that way, I've got a friend, she's an aspiring writer, and she's so good. And I said to her, look, I don't want to come across as arrogant or anything, but if you want a mentor, I would love to mentor you. And she sends me her work, and she's getting commended and, highly recognized. And she's going to be a published writer. I'm convinced of it.
Brilliant.
So, yeah.
Yeah, if you're not invested in it, it's not going to happen. But if you are, persist, because, it's a matter of outlive, outlast, outplay, right?
Totally.
All right, wonderful. Congratulations on Double Lives, and thank you so much for your time today, Kate.
Thank you for having me.